The massive alien ship floated in the dark space between two stars. It was bigger than any human city, with silver walls that gleamed under the distant starlight. Inside the ship, 12 different species had gathered for the most important meeting. In galactic history, the main conference room buzzed with nervous energy. Creatures of all shapes and sizes filled the floating chairs around a huge holographic display. Blue-skinned Zephyrians with their tall, thin bodies and glowing eyes sat next to insect-like beings whose wings made soft clicking sounds. Crystalline creatures that looked like living diamonds reflected the room's light in rainbow patterns across the walls. Admiral Kextar stood at the front of the room, his blue skin darker than usual with worry. His people had called this emergency meeting after receiving terrible news from the outer systems. The Vorthan Empire was moving again, and this time they were heading straight for the heart of Allied space. Friends and allies, Admiral Kextar began, his voice carrying the weight of desperation. We have lost 3 more systems in the past month. The Vorthans are not just conquering our worlds, they are destroying all life on them. The holographic display showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red dots marked the conquered systems, and they formed a clear line pointing toward the most populated areas of Allied space. Yellow arrows showed the predicted path of the enemy fleet. A tall creature covered in green scales raised one of its 4 arms. Commander Velinek spoke in a hissing voice that the translation machines turned into words everyone could understand. My people have studied the Vorthan ships. They are not built like normal spacecraft. They are grown like living creatures. Our weapons barely damage them because they heal themselves. Murmurs of fear spread through the room. The aquatic delegates from the ocean worlds made bubbling sounds that their translators rendered as worried whispers. The insect beings clicked their mandibles together in rapid patterns that meant deep concern in their language. We need new tactics, declared Charlene, the crystalline representative. Her voice rang like musical bells, but the melody was sad and desperate. Our last 3 battles used the same strategies. Frontal assault with maximum firepower. The Vorthans adapted to our attacks within hours. In the corner of the room, away from the main discussion, sat Commander Jake Morrison. He was human and, compared to the exotic aliens around him, he looked almost boring. Average height, brown hair going gray at the edges, and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything without showing emotion. He wore the simple blue uniform of the United Earth Navy. Jake had been invited to these meetings for 2 years now, ever since humanity had joined the Galactic Defense Alliance. Usually, he was one of the most vocal participants. Humans had a reputation for aggressive tactics and creative solutions. They often suggested ideas that other species found either brilliant or completely insane. But today, Jake said nothing. He sat perfectly still, occasionally making notes on a small tablet. Computer. His eyes moved between the holographic display and the various alien speakers, but his face showed no reaction to their increasingly desperate suggestions. The meeting continued for hours. The hive mind representatives, creatures that looked like a cross between spiders and crabs, presented detailed mathematical calculations about fleet positioning. Their collective intelligence had run millions of battle simulations, but every scenario ended in defeat or Pyrrhic victory. The probability matrices are clear, buzzed their spokescreator. Current Allied forces have a 12% chance of stopping the Vorthan advance. This calculation assumes optimal coordination and no equipment failures. The room fell silent at this news. 12% was not the kind of odds that inspired confidence. Commander Velinek turned his reptilian head toward Jake. Human Morrison, your people are known for unconventional warfare. What do you suggest? All eyes in the room focused on the quiet human in the corner. Beings with compound eyes, crystal formations, and bioluminescent patches all looked at him expectantly. Jake glanced up from his tablet, met the reptilian commander's gaze for a moment, then simply shook his head once and returned to his notes. Perhaps the human needs more time to formulate a strategy, suggested Admiral Kextar diplomatically. But there was confusion in his glowing eyes. This behavior was unlike any human he had worked with before. The depths-dwelling delegate raised several tentacles in what their species used as a gesture of speaking. When the translator rendered their gurgling language into words, the message was grim. Our deep space monitoring stations report the Vorthan fleet will reach the Kepler system in 6 days. That system has 40 billion civilians. More desperate suggestions followed. The avian species proposed hit-and-run tactics using their fastest ships. The silicon-based lifeforms offered to sacrifice their slower vessels as decoys. Every species contributed ideas born from their unique biology and culture. Through it all, Jake Morrison remained silent. He made occasional notes, sometimes nodding slightly when a speaker made a particularly interesting point, but he offered no suggestions, no corrections, and no encouragement. As the meeting stretched into its 8th hour, the alien commanders began exchanging glances. Quiet conversations started between species that had never shown much interest in each other before. The human silence was becoming more noticeable than any speech could have been. "Perhaps we should adjourn," Admiral Kextar finally said. "We all need time to prepare our forces and implement the strategies we have discussed." The various species began to file out of the conference room, their conversations filled with technical details about shield frequencies, weapon modifications, and fleet positioning. Jake Morrison gathered his tablet and followed the crowd toward the exit. Commander Velinex caught up with him in the corridor outside the conference room. The reptilian officer had to take longer strides to match the human's steady pace. "Morrison," Velinex said, his translator making his hissing words sound almost conversational. "Your silence troubles me more than our enemy's advance." Jake stopped walking and turned to face the tall, scaled creature. For a moment, his carefully neutral expression slipped, and Velinex caught a glimpse of something deeper in the human's dark eyes. It was not fear or despair like he expected. It was calculation. "Sometimes the best strategy is knowing when not to speak," Jake said quietly. Then he turned and continued walking toward the docking bay where the human ships were berthed. Velinex watched him go, his reptilian brain trying to process what he had just witnessed. In his species' culture, silence during a crisis meant either cowardice or death. But something about the human's manner suggested neither. The way Jake had observed every speaker, noted every suggestion, and absorbed every piece of tactical data pointed to something else entirely. Back in the conference room, Admiral Kextar stared at the holographic display showing the approaching Vorthan fleet. The red indicators moved slowly but steadily toward populated systems. He had commanded fleets for 3 decades, but he had never faced an enemy that seemed immune to conventional warfare. His aide, a younger Zephyrian with bright silver markings, approached with a data pad. "Admiral, the human delegation has requested permission to make modifications to their ship systems. They need access to our main computer network." "What kind of modifications?" Admiral Kextar asked. They did not specify. The request form simply lists it as tactical preparation. The Admiral considered this for a long moment. Human technology was generally less advanced than most allied species, but their weapons were often surprisingly effective. More importantly, their tactical thinking frequently produced results that defied conventional military wisdom. Grant their request, he decided, and monitor their activities. "I want to know what they are planning." As the alien commanders prepared for what might be the final battle of their civilization, none of them realized that the human silence had not been a sign of defeat. It had been the sound of a predator choosing the perfect moment to reveal its teeth. 3 days had passed since the emergency meeting, and the Allied fleets were scattered across the Kepler system, preparing for the worst battle in galactic history. Every species worked according to their nature and their strengths, but beneath the surface, tension grew like a storm waiting to break. The Zephyrian command ship had become a hub of constant activity. Admiral Kekstar moved between different stations, checking on the progress of shield modifications and weapon calibrations. His people were masters of defensive technology, and they had spent the last 72 hours improving their energy barriers and deflector systems. "Report from engineering," called out Lieutenant Zexkin from her position at the communication console. "All shield generators are operating at 112% efficiency. We can maintain this level for approximately 8 hours of continuous battle." Admiral Kekstar nodded with satisfaction. His people had always believed that the best defense was an impenetrable defense. If they could hold the line long enough, perhaps the other species could find a way to damage the Vorthan bioships. Several systems away, the crystalline fleet floated in perfect geometric formations. Their ships looked like massive cut gems, each surface designed to focus and amplify energy weapons. Charlene stood in the crystal chamber that served as her command center, surrounded by walls that hummed with stored power. "Energy levels are reaching maximum capacity," reported her second-in-command, a younger crystalline whose faceted body glowed with internal light. "Our weapon systems can deliver focused beams with 3 times normal intensity." "Excellent," Charlene replied, her musical voice creating harmonics that resonated through the crystal walls. "If we can concentrate our fire on individual Vorthan vessels, we might be able to overcome their healing abilities." The insect-like hive mind species had taken a different approach. Their ships moved in complex patterns that looked chaotic too. Outside observers but followed mathematical principles that only their collective intelligence could fully understand. They had calculated every possible angle of attack, every probability of success, and every contingency plan. Queen Speaker Zakth communicated with her fleet through pheromone signals that traveled faster than radio waves. "All units confirm. Readiness. Battle Formation 77 Alpha shows highest probability of success against biomechanical targets. Implementing defensive matrix." The aquatic depths dwellers had positioned their ships near the system's outer gas giant, where they could use the planet's magnetic field to enhance their sonar-based weapons. Their vessels looked like massive underwater creatures, streamlined and powerful. Designed for the crushing pressures of ocean depths, Commander Gloob floated in his water-filled command chamber, his tentacles dancing across control surfaces that responded to electrical impulses from his nervous system. "Deep strike teams are ready. We will hit them from below their sensor grid, where they cannot see us coming." But it was the human fleet that drew the most attention and concern from their allies. The United Earth Navy ships had spread out across the system in what appeared to be completely random positions. They showed no obvious pattern, no tactical formation, and no clear strategy. Captain Lisa Blake stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance, watching her crew work with unusual intensity. Every human on the ship moved with purpose, but they spoke in short, clipped sentences that revealed nothing about their actual mission. "Engineering reports ready on all modifications," announced Lieutenant Peter Cross from the tactical station. His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was part of something bigger than anyone else realized. "Communications. Array is online and calibrated," added Lieutenant Rita Stone from her position at the communication console. "All frequencies are locked and ready for transmission." Captain Blake nodded once. "Excellent. Maintain radio silence until we receive the signal." In the ship's engineering section, Chief Warrant Officer Amy Santos supervised teams of technicians working on equipment that looked nothing like standard human technology. They had been working for 3 days straight, modifying systems that most of the crew did not understand. "The frequency generators are stable," reported Technician First Class Bobby Chun. "We've tested them against our own bioscanners, and the effect is exactly what Dr. Hayes predicted. Amy Santos smiled grimly. Good. Make sure the backup systems are ready too. We only get one chance at this. Throughout the human fleet, similar scenes played out on every ship. The UN's Vigilance, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker, had positioned itself near the system's asteroid belt. The UN's Guardian, under Commander Helen Foster, floated in the shadow of a small moon. Each ship had undergone the same mysterious modifications, but their alien allies had no idea what the humans were actually planning. Dr. Carl Hayes worked in a specially modified laboratory aboard the command ship, UNS Defiance. The ship's xenobiologist had spent the last 3 days analyzing data that most people would have considered useless. He studied recordings of previous battles, biological samples from destroyed Vorthan ships, and communication intercepts that the translation computers could not decode. Rita, come look at this, Dr. Hayes called to Lieutenant Stone, who had been splitting her time between communications duty and helping with the research. The pattern is consistent across all 17 battles we have data for. Rita Stone leaned over the monitor, her eyes scanning the complex waveforms and frequency analyses. The bioneural networks all operate on the same baseline frequency. It's like they're all connected to the same nervous system. Exactly, Doctor. Hayes said, his voice filled with excitement. And if they're all connected, then they all share the same vulnerability. One frequency, properly calibrated, could disrupt the entire fleet. Meanwhile, the alien fleets continued their traditional preparations. The Zephyrians ran endless simulations of shield effectiveness against bioweapons. The crystallines practiced focusing their energy beams for maximum damage. The hive mind calculated and recalculated probability matrices for every possible battle scenario. None of them noticed the subtle repositioning of human vessels throughout the system. The UN's ships moved slowly, almost casually, but each movement brought them closer to specific coordinates that had been calculated with mathematical precision. Commander Velinex of the reptilian scales fleet found himself watching the human ships with growing unease. His species had survived for millions of years by being suspicious of anything not understand, and the human behavior triggered every instinct he possessed. Communications officer, he called to his subordinate, have you been able to intercept any human transmissions? No, sir, replied the younger reptilian. They have maintained complete radio silence since the briefing ended. All we detect are routine system checks and maintenance reports. Commander Velinex turned his attention to the tactical display showing the positions of all Allied vessels. The human ships were scattered across the system with no apparent pattern, but something about their placement bothered him. It was too random to be truly random. Back on the UN's Defiance, Captain Blake received a priority message on her personal communication device. The message was short and encrypted, but she had been expecting it. All department heads to the bridge, she announced over the ship's internal communication system. Final briefing in 10 minutes. When her senior officers assembled, Captain Blake looked at each of them carefully. These were people she had served with for years, and she trusted them with her life. Today, she was trusting them with something much more important. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, in approximately 18 hours, the Vorthan fleet will enter the system. They will expect to find the same tactics that have failed in 17 previous battles. They will be wrong. Lieutenant. Cross leaned forward slightly. Captain, are we cleared to inform the crew about the mission? Not yet, Captain Blake replied. Operational security remains in effect until we receive the final authorization. But I will tell you this. Everything we have done, every modification we have made, every position we have taken, has been building toward one moment. When that moment comes, we will have one chance to change the course of this war. Dr. Hayes spoke up from his position near the science station. Captain, the frequency weapon is ready. We've tested it against our own biological systems, and The results are exactly what we hoped for. But we need to be absolutely certain that the Vorthons don't detect what we're doing until it's too late. That's why we've maintained radio silence, Captain Blake explained. That's why we haven't shared our plans with the Allied fleets, and that's why Jake Morrison said nothing during the briefing. The Vorthons have shown that they can adapt to any strategy they understand. So we're going to give them a strategy they can't understand until it's too late to counter it. As the human fleet continued their silent preparations, the other species grew more nervous. The Zephyrians sent polite inquiries about human battle plans. The Crystallines offered to coordinate their energy weapons with human systems. The hive mind requested tactical data to improve their probability calculations. Every request received the same response: acknowledgement without information. The humans were ready to fight, but they were not ready to talk. The darkness of space suddenly filled with terrible light as the Vorthon Empire's fleet emerged from hyperspace. Their ships were nightmares made real, massive organic vessels that looked more like diseased whales than spacecraft. Black and purple, flesh-covered hulls that pulsed with veins of sickly green energy. These were not machines built in factories, but creatures grown in biotanks, fed on the life force of conquered worlds. Admiral Zexamore stood in the nerve center of his flagship, surrounded by walls of living tissue that responded to his thoughts. The Vorthon commander was tall and gaunt, with pale skin stretched tight over sharp bones. His eyes were completely black, without pupils or irises, and they saw things that normal eyes could not detect. "Report," he commanded, his voice causing the organic walls to shiver. "We detect the expected defensive formations," replied his bioship's living computer, speaking through growths that resembled mouths scattered across the walls. Zephyrian shield technology, crystalline energy weapons, insectoid mathematical formations. Standard Allied tactics. Admiral Zexamore smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous for any natural creature. "Excellent. They have learned nothing from their previous defeats. Begin the harvest." The Vorthon fleet spread out across the system like a disease, their bioships moving with the fluid grace of sea creatures. Each vessel was unique, grown for a specific purpose. Some were massive and slow, designed to absorb enemy fire while their hulls regenerated. Others were small and quick, built to drain the life from enemy crews through bioweapons that could penetrate any known shielding. On the Allied command ship, Admiral Kekstar watched the enemy approach with growing dread. The Vorthon fleet was even larger than intelligence reports had suggested. Nearly 200 bioships moved in perfect coordination, their organic minds linked together in a network that no mechanical computer could match. "All Allied fleets, prepare for engagement," Admiral Kekstar broadcast on the General Communication Channel. "Remember, focus your fire on individual targets. Do not let them regenerate." The Zephyrian ships moved into their defensive positions, their blue hulls glowing as shield generators charged to maximum power. Their strategy was simple: create an impenetrable wall of energy that would force the Vorthons to waste their strength against superior defensive technology. The crystalline fleet took a different approach. Charlene's ships arranged themselves into a complex geometric pattern that would allow them to focus all their energy weapons on single targets. Their crystal hulls began to glow with stored power, building up the massive energy discharges that could theoretically overwhelm Vorthon. Regeneration. "All units, prepare for coordinated firing sequence," Charlene announced, her musical voice carrying across the crystal communication network. "Target the largest bioship first. If we can destroy their command vessel, the others might lose." Coordination. The insectoid hive mind fleet moved according to calculations that had been running for days. Their ships darted between asteroids and space debris, using mathematical precision to position themselves for maximum tactical advantage. Queen Speaker Zokth coordinated the movement of hundreds of vessels through pheromone signals that created a three-dimensional battle plan of incredible complexity. Probability matrices indicate optimal attack vectors, she buzzed to her fleet. Implementing Strategy 77 Alpha with modifications for bioregenerative targets. But it was the human fleet that drew the most attention from both allies and enemies. The United Earth Navy ships had taken positions that seemed random and tactically useless. Some floated near the outer planets, others hid behind moons or in asteroid fields. They showed no formation, no obvious strategy, and most disturbing of all, they maintained complete radio silence. Captain Lisa Blake stood on the bridge of the UNSS Defiance, watching the approaching Vorthan fleet through the main view screen. Her crew worked quietly at their stations, each person focused on equipment that their alien allies had never seen before. Engineering reports all frequency generators are online and stable, announced Lieutenant Peter Cross from the tactical station. Biosensors are detecting Vorthan neural patterns exactly as Dr. Hayes predicted. Communications array is ready for broadcast, added Lieutenant Rita Stone. All human ships report ready for coordinated transmission. Captain Blake nodded once. Maintain current positions. Do not engage until we receive the authorization code. Throughout the human fleet, similar scenes played out on every bridge. The UN's Vigilance held position near the asteroid belt, its crew ready at stations that controlled equipment the other species could not identify. The UN's Guardian remained hidden in the shadow of a small moon, its bioscanners locked onto the approaching enemy fleet. The Vorthan advance continued with the confidence of predators who had never met effective resistance. Their bioships pulsed with dark energy, and weapon ports opened like hungry mouths along their organic hulls. They had conquered 17 allied systems using the same tactics, and they expected the 18th to fall just as easily. Admiral Zeximor studied the tactical display that grew directly from his ship's living walls. The enemy positions looked exactly like all the previous battles. Begin the harvest protocol. Target the Zephyrian shields first. Once their defenses fail, the others will break and run. The first Vorthan bioweapons fired, sending streams of dark energy across space toward the Allied fleet. These were not normal weapons that destroyed matter through heat or kinetic force. Vorthan bioweapons drained the life force from their targets, turning the energy of living beings into fuel for their organic ships. The Zephyrian shields flared to brilliant blue as they absorbed the enemy attack. For a moment, it seemed their defensive strategy might work. But the bioweapons were designed to adapt, and within minutes they began to find weaknesses in the energy barriers. Shields down to 80%, reported Admiral Kekstar's tactical officer. The enemy weapons are adapting to our defensive frequencies. The crystalline fleet responded with a massive coordinated energy discharge. Dozens of ships focused their weapons on a single large bioship, creating a beam of pure energy that lit up space like a small star. The attack struck the Vorthan vessel directly, burning through its organic hull and causing massive damage. But even as they watched, the bioship began to heal. New tissue grew over the damaged areas, and within minutes the vessel was fully restored. Worse, the other Vorthan ships seemed to learn from the attack, their hulls developing new resistances to energy weapons. Impossible, Charlene whispered, her musical voice carrying notes of despair. Our maximum power discharge did nothing permanent. The hive mind fleet launched their own attack, using mathematical precision to strike at what their calculations indicated were the most vulnerable points on Vorthan bioships. Hundreds of smaller vessels swarmed around the enemy fleet like angry insects, their weapons targeting specific areas that should have caused system failures. The attacks hit their marks perfectly, but the results were the same. The bioships absorbed the damage and healed within minutes. Even worse, they began to adapt their defensive systems to counter the insectoid weapons. Recalculating probability matrices, Queen Speaker Zoth announced, but her voice carried the electronic equivalent of panic. Current tactics showing 0% effectiveness. Bioships are learning faster than our weapons can adapt. As the battle raged, the human ships remained motionless and silent. Their alien allies began to send increasingly desperate messages asking for assistance, but the humans did not respond. They simply watched as the Vorthan fleet systematically overwhelmed each allied formation. Commander Velenex of the Reptilian Scales fleet found himself staring at the tactical display in disbelief. The humans were not even trying to help. Their ships sat in their scattered positions, making no effort to join the battle that was clearly being lost. Communications officer, send an emergency message to the human fleet, he ordered. Tell them we need immediate assistance or the battle is lost. I have been trying, sir, his subordinate replied. The humans are not responding to any communication. Attempts. They appear to be maintaining complete radio silence. The Depths Dwellers launched their own attack, using sonar-based weapons that should have disrupted the bioship's organic navigation systems. But like all the other allied weapons, the Vorthan vessels adapted within minutes and continued their advance. Admiral Zexamore watched the battle with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as he had expected. The Allied forces were using the same tactics that had failed 17 times before, and they were failing again. Estimated time to complete victory? He asked his bioship's living computer. Current rate of adaptation suggests Allied resistance will collapse within 2 hours, the organic voice replied. Their weapons are becoming less effective with each attack as our hulls learn to counter them. But Admiral Zexamore was a careful commander who had survived many battles by never underestimating his enemies. He turned his attention to the human ships scattered throughout the system. They had not fired a single shot, but something about their positioning bothered him. Analysis of human fleet positions, he commanded. The moment Jake Morrison's voice crackled across the human communication network, everything changed. Captain Lisa Blake felt her heart pound as she turned to her crew on the bridge of the UN's Defiance. After 6 days of silence, it was finally time to reveal what humanity had been planning. You heard the commander, Captain Blake announced to her bridge crew. All stations, execute Protocol 7 immediately. Lieutenant Peter Cross's hands moved across his tactical console with practiced precision. Frequency generators coming online now. Target lock acquired on primary Vorthan biosignatures. Lieutenant Rita Stone worked at the communication station, her fingers dancing over controls that had been modified specifically for this moment. Transmission array is ready. All human ships report ready for coordinated broadcast. Dr. Carl Hayes stood at the science station, watching displays that showed the neural patterns of every Vorthan bioship in the system. Bioscanners confirm target acquisition. Their neural networks are operating on exactly the frequency we predicted. Throughout the human fleet, similar preparations unfolded with military efficiency. On the UN's Vigilance, Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker gave the order to his crew. Begin transmission sequence. All power to the frequency generators. Chief Warrant Officer Amy Santos monitored the engineering systems as massive amounts of energy flowed through equipment that had taken 3 days to build and calibrate. Generators are stable. We're getting perfect resonance with the target frequency. On the UN's Guardian, Commander Helen Foster watched her tactical display as the modified communication array prepared to broadcast a signal that no one in the galaxy had ever used as a weapon before. All systems green. Standing by for coordinated transmission. The alien fleets continued their desperate battle against the Vorthan bioships, unaware that everything was about to change. Admiral Kekstar watched his shields fail under the constant bioweapon assault, while Charlene's crystalline fleet found their energy weapons becoming less effective with each shot as the enemy ships adapted. Sir, the human ships are powering up some kind of transmission equipment, reported Admiral Kekstar's communication officer. We're detecting massive energy signatures from their communication arrays. What are they transmitting? Admiral Kekstar demanded. Unknown, sir. The signal is not on any standard communication frequency. It appears to be some kind of bio-neural pattern. Admiral Zexamore noticed the change in human activity at the same moment. His bioship's living computer analyzed the energy signatures coming from the scattered human vessels and found something that worried the organic intelligence. Human ships are generating coordinated electromagnetic pulses, the biocomputer reported. The frequency pattern is unusual. It does not match any known weapon system. Can our ships adapt to this new weapon? Admiral Zexamore asked. Analyzing, the biocomputer replied. But for the first time in the battle, there was a pause before the answer came. Unable to determine threat level. The frequency pattern is unlike anything in our defensive database. Captain Blake watched the countdown timer on her tactical display reach 0. All ships, begin transmission on my mark. 3, 2, 1, execute. What happened next defied everything the galaxy thought. It knew about warfare. Instead of firing energy weapons or launching missiles, the human ships began broadcasting a specific frequency pattern that Dr. Hayes and Rita Stone had discovered during their research into Vorthan biology. The signal was precisely calibrated to interfere with the bio-neural networks that controlled every Vorthan vessel. It was not a weapon that destroyed matter or drained energy. It was something far more devastating, a frequency that turned the Vorthans' greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The first Vorthan bioship to be hit by the frequency transmission began to convulse like a living creature in pain. Its organic hull writhed and twisted as the neural pathways that controlled its movement went completely haywire. What is happening to our ships? Admiral Zexamore demanded as his flagship shuddered around him. The biocomputer's response came in broken, stuttering phrases as its own neural networks were disrupted by the human frequency. Neural interference cannot compensate ... Biosystems. Failing ... Organic control networks ... Breaking down. Across the Vorthan fleet, bioships began losing control. Their organic pilots found themselves unable to steer as their nervous systems fought against the hull's biocomputer. Weapon systems fired randomly or shut down completely as the neural networks that coordinated them collapsed. Lieutenant Cross reported from his tactical station with barely contained excitement. Direct hits on all target vessels. Their bio-neural networks are showing massive disruption. The frequency is holding steady. Dr. Hayes monitored the bioscanners, watching as the Vorthan ship's nervous systems tore themselves apart. The interference pattern is propagating through their entire fleet network. They can't isolate individual ships because they're all connected to the same bio-neural web. The alien allies watched in stunned amazement as the previously unstoppable Vorthan fleet began to destroy itself. Bioships collided with each other as their pilots lost control. Others spun helplessly through space as their navigation systems failed. Some began firing their weapons at random targets, including other Vorthan vessels. Impossible, whispered Charlene, her musical voice filled with awe. The humans are defeating the Vorthans without firing a single conventional weapon. Admiral Kekstar stared at his tactical display, unable to believe what he was seeing. How are they doing this? What kind of weapon can turn bioships against themselves? Commander Velinex of the Scales finally understood why the human had remained silent during the briefing. It is not a weapon, he said slowly. It is knowledge. They studied the enemy while we debated tactics. The Vorthan flagship bucked and twisted as Admiral Zexamore fought to maintain control. His bioship's living computer was barely functional, its responses coming in pained whispers as the neural networks that comprised its intelligence fell apart. Countermeasures, Admiral Zexamore ordered desperately. Adapt to the frequency. Evolve past their weapon. Cannot adapt, the biocomputer managed to reply. Frequency targets fundamental neural architecture. Cannot evolve past basic nervous system requirements. All bioships affected. Fleet coordination lost. Around him, the organic walls of his ship pulsed erratically as different systems tried to function independently. Navigation pulled in one direction while weapon systems fired in another. The regenerative hull began growing random tissue formations as the biocomputer lost control of cellular growth. Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker watched from the UN's vigilance as Vorthan bioships throughout the system began exhibiting the same symptoms. The frequency is propagating through their entire network. Every ship that was connected to their bio-neural web is affected. Chief Warrant Officer Amy Santos monitored the power systems as they maintained the frequency transmission. Generators are stable. We can maintain this broadcast for approximately 6 hours before we need to cycle the equipment. That should be more than enough, Commander Helen Foster replied from the UNS Guardian. Look at them. They can't even control their own ships anymore. The human frequency weapon exploited a fundamental flaw in Vorthan technology that no one had recognized before. Their bioships were so advanced, so perfectly integrated with organic nervous systems, that they had become vulnerable to a type of attack that purely mechanical vessels could never suffer from. Dr. Hayes explained the science to Captain Blake as they watched the enemy fleet tear itself apart. Their bio-neural networks operate on a specific frequency that allows perfect coordination between ship and pilot. But that same frequency can be disrupted by external interference. It's like giving their ships a nervous breakdown. And because all their ships are connected to the same network, Rita Stone added, the interference spreads to every vessel in their fleet. They can't isolate the damage or adapt to it because the frequency targets the basic neural architecture that makes their technology possible. Admiral Zexamore tried one final desperate measure. All ships cut bio-neural connections. Switch to manual control systems, but it was too late. The Vorthan ships had been designed to be completely integrated with their bio-neural networks. Manual control was impossible because there were no purely mechanical backup systems. The bioships were living creatures, and the human frequency was destroying their ability to think. Captain Blake watched as Vorthan vessels throughout the system either collided with each other, spun out of control, or simply shut down as their biocomputers failed completely. All human ships maintain frequency transmission. Do not let up until every enemy vessel is disabled. The alien fleet slowly moved closer to observe the devastating effectiveness of the human weapon. Ships that had seemed invincible just minutes before now drifted helplessly through space, their organic hulls twitching occasionally as damaged neural networks tried unsuccessfully to restore control. Incredible, Admiral Kekstar said, his voice filled with wonder. In 17 battles, no one discovered this weakness. How did the humans find it? The silence that followed the destruction of the Vorthan fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. For the first time in over a year, space was peaceful. No bioweapons fired across the darkness. No organic ships regenerated from battle damage. The most feared military force in the galaxy drifted helplessly through space, their bio-neural networks permanently damaged by the human frequency weapon. Captain Lisa Blake stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance, watching the tactical display that showed hundreds of disabled Vorthan vessels. Some still twitched occasionally as their damaged nervous systems tried to restore control, but they were no longer a threat to anyone. All human ships reduce transmission power to minimum maintenance levels, she ordered. Keep the frequency active but conserve energy. We want to make sure none of those bioships can recover. Lieutenant Peter Cross monitored the bioscanners from his tactical station. All Vorthan neural networks show complete disruption. Their biocomputers are offline and their organic pilots are unconscious. The ships are effectively brain dead. Doctor, Carl Hayes studied the scientific data streaming across his displays. The frequency weapon had worked even better than his most optimistic predictions. The neural damage appears to be permanent. Their bio-neural networks were so tightly integrated that the frequency disruption caused complete system failure. Throughout the Allied fleet, alien commanders struggled to understand what they had just witnessed. The Vorthan Empire had conquered 17 star systems using biotechnology that seemed impossible to defeat. Their ships could regenerate from any damage, adapt to any weapon, and coordinate attacks with perfect precision. Yet the humans had destroyed them all without firing a single energy, beam, or kinetic projectile. Admiral Kextar was the first to break the stunned silence. His voice carried across the communication channels with a mixture of relief and amazement. All Allied vessels, stand down from combat alert. The enemy fleet has been completely neutralized. But even as he gave the order, Admiral Kextar found himself staring at the human ships with new understanding. The scattered positions that had seemed so random and tactically useless now revealed themselves as the perfect placement for a coordinated frequency transmission that could reach every corner of the system. The Galactic Defense Council reconvened aboard Admiral Kextar's command ship within hours of the battle's end. Representatives from all 12 species gathered in the same conference room where Jake Morrison had remained silent just 6 days earlier. But the atmosphere was completely different now. Jake Morrison sat in the same corner position, but this time every alien eye in the room focused on him with respect and curiosity. The quiet human who had said nothing during their desperate planning session had just saved the galaxy using a strategy that none of them had even imagined. Admiral Kextar spoke first, his blue skin glowing with excitement. "Commander Morrison, we owe you an explanation of how your people accomplished this victory. The Vorthan bioships were supposed to be invincible." Jake Morrison looked around the room at the assembled alien representatives. For 6 days, he had kept the human plan secret from even their closest allies. Now it was time to explain why that secrecy had been absolutely necessary. "We studied your enemy while you planned conventional tactics," Jake said simply. "Every battle record, every piece of biological data, every communication intercept. We learned that the Vorthan's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness." Commander Velinex of the Reptilian Scales leaned forward, his scaled features showing deep interest. "But how did you discover the frequency vulnerability?" "Our best scientists analyzed Vorthan technology for months without finding anything useful." Dr. Hayes stood up from his position beside Jake Morrison. "We had an advantage that your scientists didn't have. Human neural networks are completely different from both Vorthan biotechnology and from your species' biological systems. We could study their neural patterns objectively, without unconscious assumptions about how organic intelligence should work." Charlene, the crystalline representative, created musical tones that the translators rendered as questions. "But the frequency itself, how did you know it would disable their entire fleet?" Lieutenant Rita Stone, who had been invited to the council meeting as one of the key researchers, answered the question. "We discovered that all Vorthan bioships operate on the same fundamental neural frequency. It's like a carrier wave that allows their organic computers to communicate with their pilots and with each other. Once we identified that frequency," Dr. Hayes continued, "we realized we could disrupt it using modified communication equipment. The bio-neural networks were so perfectly integrated that interference with the base frequency caused complete system failure." Queen Speaker Zakth of the insectoid hive mind buzzed with electronic curiosity. "This explains the technical aspects, but not the tactical deception. Why did you maintain radio silence? Why did you not share this plan with your allies?" "Jake." Morrison's expression became serious. "Because the Vorthans have spies among the civilian populations of several allied species. If we had revealed our plan during the briefing, word would have leaked to the enemy. They would have modified their bio-neural networks to operate on different frequencies. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans had not just developed a secret weapon, they had protected it through operational security that none of the other species had considered necessary. Admiral Kextar spoke slowly, his voice filled with new understanding. "You suspected. There were spies in our midst." "We knew there were spies," Jake Morrison replied firmly. "Human intelligence services identified at least 3 Vorthan agents operating within allied civilian networks. We couldn't risk exposing our only effective weapon to enemy surveillance." Commander Velinex asked the question that several other representatives were thinking. "But what if your frequency weapon had failed? You allowed us to enter battle with no knowledge of your real strategy. We could have all been destroyed." Captain Blake, who had also been invited to the council meeting, answered this concern. "Our weapon worked in laboratory tests against captured Vorthan biosamples. We were confident it would be effective against their full fleet. But more importantly, conventional tactics had failed 17 times. If we had tried traditional warfare, we would definitely have lost. The frequency weapon was our only chance for victory," Dr. Hayes added. "But it only worked because the Vorthans didn't know it was coming. Surprise was the most critical element of our strategy." The depths-dwelling representative raised several tentacles in a gesture of acknowledgement. "The tactical deception was brilliant. But how do we prevent the Vorthans from adapting to this weapon in future battles?" Jake Morrison smiled for the first time since the meeting began. "That brings us to the best part of our strategy. We've distributed frequency generator blueprints to all allied fleets. Every ship in the galaxy can now be equipped with this weapon." Lieutenant Rita Stone continued the explanation. "But more importantly, the neural frequency we targeted is fundamental to Vorthan biotechnology. They can't change it without completely rebuilding their entire fleet from the genetic level up. That would take decades. And if they try to develop new bioships with different neural frequencies," Dr. Hayes added, "we'll be ready. Now that we understand the principle behind bioneural disruption, we can develop countermeasures for any organic technology they create." Charlene's crystalline structure resonated with musical notes of amazement. "You have not just won a single battle. You have eliminated the Vorthan military advantage permanently." Admiral Kextar looked around the council chamber, seeing his own thoughts reflected in the faces of the other species representatives. "Commander Morrison, your people have changed the course of this war. But I must ask, why did you share this technology with us now? You could have kept the frequency weapon as a human military advantage." Jake Morrison stood up, his quiet demeanor commanding the attention of every being in the room. "Because this war isn't about human victory or alien victory. It's about survival against an enemy that wants to destroy all life in the galaxy. The frequency weapon works best when every ship in the Allied fleet can use it." He paused, looking at each representative in turn. "But there's something else you need to understand. This victory teaches us all an important lesson about warfare. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the biggest gun or the strongest shield. Sometimes it's the discipline to remain silent until the right moment." Dr. Hayes concluded the briefing with words that would reshape galactic military doctrine for generations to come. The Vorthan Empire believed they were invincible because their biotechnology could adapt to any conventional weapon. They were wrong. There is no defense against an enemy who understands your weaknesses better than you understand them yourself. As the council meeting ended, the various species representatives filed out with new respect for human strategic thinking. They had witnessed something unprecedented, not just a military victory, but a demonstration of how silence, patience, and deep understanding could overcome seemingly impossible odds.